I'm Dr. Evelyn. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm here with my guest, Melanie Davis, publisher and CEO of Triumph Press. Today, we're going to dive into some of the serious abusive situations that I experienced as a teenager.
Thank you for having me back again, Evelyn. For anyone who's just tuning in, we had a really good conversation last week to kind of learn a little bit more about your background. And I was telling you at the end of that I really feel like we would all benefit from learning more about your abusive situations so that we can really understand the steps to healing that you're going to share. Would you mind giving us a little more detail about some of the things that you went through?
I'm going to go back to when I was a teenager. I can talk about that now because of therapy. For many years of my life, I did not speak on these situations, but I can remember as a 16-year-old walking through neighborhoods and just being physically assaulted. One time I was physically assaulted in my face, and I was pregnant at the time, and my nose got busted. And when my nose was busted, it led to me having a black eye at the age of 16 and pregnant.
So can you talk about the person, and for those who might just be tuning in, we'll kind of refresh that you refer to those who abused you as your footstools. Not what you called them at the time, I'm sure, but now that you look back, you can see how they helped you become who you are today. So your first footstool, your first abuser, can you tell us about what life was like with that person and what some of the abuse looked like?
Life was just total chaos when I left my family and friends. Those were my protectors. I stepped out into a world that I was unfamiliar with. I would like to stress that the world outside of your family and friends is never going to treat you the way your family and friends will treat you. I was unfamiliar. I just got into a lot of situations, being unbalanced, just living a toxic lifestyle because of who I had connected myself to, because I wasn't aware and I did not know any better. I remember one time I went to the emergency room. I was hit in the mouth by my first footstool because he was saying something and I responded. And he took his fist and he hit me in my mouth with it. And I went to the emergency room and I told the people at the hospital what happened. And there was an emergency room doctor there. I was around maybe 17 or 18 at that time. But the doctor told me that you don't deserve to be abused like this. Because I told them I've always been truthful about what happened. And they said that you just don't deserve this. But at that time, it just was not registering because I almost became addicted to that type lifestyle. Because like I said, when I went into it, I didn't know any better.
How often did he treat you badly? Was it constant? Was it occasional?
That was constant. It was constant abuse between my first footstool and myself. And at a point, I will say, I want to be transparent. In a situation like that, I did experience reactive abuse. I retaliated a couple of times because I felt like my life was in danger. I did.
Yeah. And you're a tough woman. I mean, so even as a young one, I know you were kind of scrappy. So
I was. I had a reputation like that, but I had to mature. Look where God has brought me to. Look what he
yeah.
brought me from.
So I'm glad you brought up the word reactive abuse. Not everybody's heard that term. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Reactive abuse is a situation where you can be poked and prodded by your abuser. And when you react, you respond. Oftentimes, they will have note of that. And see, nobody knows what caused the person to react. But when the abuser gets you to react, if the authorities are called and you're still reacting to the abuse, you're going to be the one to get into trouble.
That's extremely important because essentially the abuse drives you to the point that you appear like you're the abuser because you're just mirroring and returning what you've been receiving out of frustration. and they'll drive
That's
you to a point
correct.
of frustration. And I believe there's many who are calculating enough to actually do that on purpose. Their whole point is to see they're just prodding you to react. And then they use that reaction to abuse you further through the system, through calling the police, through other
And thinking
entities.
while we're having this discussion, my second footstool was definitely known for doing that because I was harassed 5 years after the divorce. I don't know what the person expected for me to do, but they caught me on my healing journey and I had gained better sense and better
Mhm.
knowledge that I had when I was a teenager because I believe if my second footstool would have ran into me when I was a teenager, something bad would have happened because I had not matured
Yeah.
at all. I would not be sitting on this radio show. I don't believe I would be free if I had not gotten a chance to mature and get on a healing journey.
Right, right. And that's, I think that's really important because it would be interesting if there could ever be a study of how many people are in prison because they have been reactive to an abuser. I
I
believe
think there's many. I
I think
believe that there's
especially,
many.
not to be sexist, but I think that you would find that a majority of women in prison are victims of trafficking or reactive abuse and trauma. And then it's so easy to make them look like they were the ones that were the criminals when because I work with human trafficking too. And I published a number of books for them. So I bring this in because I just think it's really
That's
fitting,
okay.
to be able to point out that a lot of times when they're being trafficked, they're forced to go out and bring in more girls, or they are doing things that are illegal and they get arrested for it even though they were actually being forced to do it. And I
Yes.
think it's fair to say that the abuse that you bring to the table, because you gave back sometimes what you're getting, can appear like you are the assaulter instead of the victim. And so I think that's really important. I think
As a matter of fact,
society.
at the end of my second relationship, it got physical. At
Mhm.
first, it was just a lot of mental in a marriage. I'm talking about with my second footstool now.
Right.
There was a lot of mental, emotional, financial abuse, all types of abuse. But at the end, it did get physical. But
What?
I was only protecting myself. And the second footstool called the authorities
Ah.
and tried to make it look like it was me because I think the system was aware that I had a past and they
Mhm.
were going to try to, I believe, set me up to make it look like I was the aggressor when I was not the aggressor in that situation.
Yeah. And it's easy to see how the system can be prejudiced when they just look at records and say, oh, well, she's been in fights or she's been arrested before. Clearly, she is the one that has this. When you were being abused since childhood,
Yeah.
because I would call 15, 16 years old childhood when you had someone abusing you. So I just think that's really an important point to make. We need to be aware of abuse and treat it, and not just treat people like criminals who are really, I also work with prisoners. I work with incarcerated veterans. Our mental institutions are prisons. Our prisons are our mental institutions. We just, you know what I'm saying? Like, to
Yeah.
be able to really say, hey, these people needed therapy. And this is what you're seeing is reactive to the abuse
That's
that
what
they
it is.
suffered. And to reframe it instead of saying, oh, well, you are an assaulter and you are a felon and when we really look at the history, not just the criminal record and the arrest record, but the history of what's happened to someone. Of course, sometimes it's hard to know what the history is because you don't always have your abuse recorded. Um,
In places like family court, if you
yeah,
haven't been recording the abuse and you don't have any evidence, it's like it never happened.
exactly.
It's like it never happened, so
What advice can you give then? I know that at the time you probably wouldn't have been able to think about it, but now that you're on the other end, you're an advocate, speaking to people who may be still in it. What advice can you give them so that they can get the evidence that they need to be able to show they have been abused as a form of protection and preparation for anything that might come down the road? Because a lot came down the road for you. And we're going to get
a
into that more
lot.
in future episodes. But just really to take a moment and say, hey, if I had known, here's what I would have done, or here's what I think you should do. Can you give some of that advice?
Can. And I will say this, being an advocate, you can't make decisions for people because you have to leave them the opportunity to have their own autonomy. That means for them to make the decision. But for me, when I was in my situation, I wish I had an advocate that was available to help me to try to understand exactly what was happening. They can lead you to resources and education, and then you can kind of figure out what's happening, but there was really nobody there.
So,
That's why,
well, have finding a mentor, reaching out to somebody who's in a healthy place, maybe someone like you that's been through it.
Melanie, it was very difficult even finding that person. That's how I became Dr. Evelyn and Evelyn the Advocate, because when I was going through these situations, there was nobody there to
Yeah.
tell me to document the stuff, get evidence as to what's really happening. Because if you don't have documentation, if you don't tell anyone, tell a trusted friend or a family member, it's like these things never ever happen.
So how should they document, and how can they safely document it? I'm sure there's some risks, and I know you talked about in the last episode, you didn't leave for a long time because you were worried you might be unalived. So when people are facing that, how can they collect the evidence safely? Any advice on that?
Try to get witnesses, even though people are afraid now to speak up. That's how society is. That's why we have this platform that I'm grateful for, so
Mhm.
we can have real life conversations about these situations. Try to get a witness. Try to get some recordings. Try to get some videos so that they will be your witnesses. Nobody can deny a actual video recording if you choose to do this, if you're going through these things, and if you choose to leave, because it's up to you. We don't know the circumstances and we cannot advise you to leave. But when you get to the point when you feel like you want to leave, think about having some hardcore evidence.
So thankfully, back in the day when this was happening to you, you didn't really have smartphone. But thankfully today, most people have the capability of getting the evidence in reality. And I think that it's probably reasonable to think that you could turn on a video, start a recording, and just even if it's just the audio of what's happening, obviously
Yes.
if you're holding your phone up, just as an example. So if you're holding your phone up and you're filming them, you're gonna
Keep it in
probably
your
you're
pocket.
gonna
Don't
get
make it so.
beamed. But if you just turn it on, let it just sit there on the table, put it in your pocket, let it just
Yes.
roll. Now you're getting something. It is possible for it to be subtle. I think this is probably one of your greatest tools. I like how you pointed out get a witness, and really this is probably one of your greatest witnesses because they're
It
not
is.
they're not what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of times sometimes witnesses have different perspectives kind of based on their own view, right? But these are more factual even
Yeah.
and
Because
pretty undeniable. Yeah.
actual abuser will make people not
You can't
believe the
cross-check
victim.
this. You can't, you can put a witness on the stand and cross-check them and, make them look like they're liars or
Yes.
whatever, but you can't question this isn't lying. Is what it is.
No.
So
But
definitely
a lot
learn
of
how to use that.
abusers will make victims look like they're not telling the truth.
Right.
That's what they do.
Yeah. So definitely using, and they're probably actually, I would imagine there are those that are in situations where they don't have access to this
Yes.
because the abuser is savvy enough to know that could be used against them. And really, these are probably your more confined abusive situations, which definitely happen. And those are people who maybe aren't even hearing this because they don't have access to see it. But definitely being able to be your own advocate is
That's
important.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So your life in the first footstool situation was physically abusive on a regular basis.
Yes, it was. It
Yeah.
was awful.
And then your second footstool, which was a marriage, was also abusive, but more in the emotional and financial. Could you dive in a little bit more to explain what financial abuse looks like? Because not everybody might know what that
Oh,
is.
looking back at my life, remember I became a single parent. I was so used to providing for my son and I. I lived my life that way because I was conditioned to be a survivor and provider. So when I got married, at first I really wasn't paying any attention, but as time went on, I realized that I had no access to the marital finances. That's when my
Um,
eyes really became open because I
but
was not focusing on
did he
that.
give you cash, or did you just never get to shop at all?
He gave me cash on occasion, but it was very rarely.
So you
So
just
this was I couldn't hear you.
so you just were not able to do any kind of financial transaction whatsoever?
Nothing with
Wow.
my own money that I worked for. Those are the financial transactions that I was able to make because I
Right.
believe my second footstool had in his mind, oh well, I'm marrying her, but that's her child. It's not mine. She's gonna just take care of her child. And that's what I done.
Right.
Even though we were in a married situation. And for a long time, because I had not addressed my past abuse and my past flaws, I did not even notice what was happening.
Yeah. And that is really important because a lot of times you would when you're in a healthy situation, you can look at those situations and go, "How do you not see it?" But abuse, especially emotional abuse, can be so effective that you really are blinded to the unfairness of what you're going through.
It can be very subtle. And if
Yeah.
you're dealing with a manipulator, a master manipulator, they can make your mind believe that it's something else because you're not even focusing on what they're really doing.
Yeah.
That's why you have to be aware of yourself as a person and you have to go and get to know yourself so you won't keep making these same mistakes. And I'm talking from experience.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that a whole episode could be focused on the things that you can be doing so that you can prevent. I mean, let's talk prevention next time. So you can prevent becoming abused in the first place and then how to heal if you have been abused.
I'm Dr. Evelyn, and I thank you for joining. And we hope that people will tune in to these conversations and become educated because we are having some real world, real life conversations to help everyone. Thank you for joining.